Focused on quality and convenience, there isn't much you won't find at Marie's Mini Mart. Home-style breads, sandwiches, plus a variety of artisan breads and delicious single-serve desserts available exclusively at our Frecker Drive location. Marie's Mini Mart, with 25 locations wherever you go, there we are.
Hello, I'm Karl Wells. My guest today is one of Newfoundland and Labrador's foremost visual artists. He's a master printmaker, and much of his work is based on his Indigenous ancestry. His name is Jerry Evans, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the program, Jerry.
Thank you, Karl.
I want to talk to you about your ancestry, first of all. How old were you when you found out that you had these Indigenous roots?
Oh, from a very early age. I mean, I was living in Windsor and Grand Falls. We moved before I entered grade 1, and we moved to Cornerbrook at the time. But I knew previously to that because I remember asking my grandfather, why we get called these names, and that, I have cousins who are, have straighter hair, darker skin, and so on. And he told me, why. Told me the story, and that was that. I mean, we always knew, but nobody really spoke about it, and it wasn't until it was in my 20s that my grandfather's brother, Uncle Karl, came home from, my great uncle came home from Ontario, and myself and Dad were going moose hunting out in Central, and we were living here in St. John's at the time. And during that trip, he told me the story of his mother, my great grandmother, and at the time, that kind of, I sat with that for some time, and but I think that was the kind of turning point that gave me license to the desire to find out more about that part of our ancestry that nobody really spoke about, and it's been a journey ever since, really.
So when you initially found out, was this news exciting to you? How did it make you feel?
That's a good question. How did it make me feel? Curious, I guess, more than anything else. To want to know more about something that, a lot of people in my family weren't willing to talk about, because, I began to ask questions and I didn't get a lot of answers, but I kept asking questions and so on.
Why were they unwilling to share this information with fellow family members?
Well, I mean, my story is mirrored by, a lot of similar stories in this place. This is, we call Gadamguk in our language, place across the waves here in Newfoundland. Before joining Canada in 1949, the Indigenous people of this province lived on the periphery of white society, in places like Windsor or Glenwood, isolated communities in the Con River and Flat Bay, and just to eke out a living, in white society, basically, or to work in the periphery of that colonialist situation, to fit in, to make a living, to feed our families, and in doing so, a lot of people hid their ancestry, to fit in, stop speaking the language, to fit in, speaking the colonialist language, in some cases, in a lot of cases, I guess over a period of time, not being a tight-knit community, but kind of spreading out to eke out, a lot of cultural aspects of including language were lost, and in doing so, if you lose your language, a lot of that culture disappears too. And I know a lot of people, our story is very similar to, well, probably 80% of the Indigenous population here, have that same story.
I remember when I was in school, we learned nothing about the Indigenous Newfoundlanders. We learned about the Beothuk, obviously, but that was all we knew. We had no idea about the fact that there had been Indigenous people living in Newfoundland, were still living in Newfoundland, had been here for hundreds of years, in fact. It was just, and to be honest, I don't think there's much taught in schools today.
It's somewhat, it's a little better, but not much. I mean, we were taught that, you know, well, I was taught the same thing you were taught, very little, and those instilled myths that the you know, those colonialists, those British myths were instilled. You know, that you know, the Mi'kmaq were brought here by the French to kill the Beothuk, which was English propaganda against the French.
Total
enemies,
propaganda.
Right? Total.
Total
Yeah,
propaganda.
and you know, we've been here since time immemorial. You know, and the Beothuk, the Bidagawa, you know, in our language, our people up the river. I mean, we're all Algonquin-speaking peoples, and we're probably related. I mean, really, come on, you know.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just that, like, well, for instance, you know, you look at the white colonialist fishing communities, the outports here in Newfoundland. You know, you go from one community to the next. If they're static in each place, you know, there were dialectic language differences, you know, from one community to the next, and that was probably the case with the Mi'kmaq and the Beothuk. I mean, there's lots of factors where, you know, in 1765, when the French were forced out of Acadia, you know, and the Mi'kmaq were Catholicized at that time, and the priests were forced out of Nova Scotia to what was at the time the French shore of Newfoundland, and a lot of Indigenous people from Nova Scotia came with the priests in that to Newfoundland, right? And with the other French people who were their allies, and you know, to eke out a living here too, you know, alongside their allies, the French. Eventually, the French were forced off Newfoundland to what is now St. Pierre-Miquelon, and there's, you know, there's ties there with the Mi'kmaq community.
So how far along have you gotten in your journey of discovery about your roots? I mean, have you found out everything you need to know now, or is there still are there still things you're exploring?
I'll be exploring until I pass, I think. I mean, you know, this is a lifelong journey for me, and you know, I've been trying to learn my language for many years, and without immersion, I don't think that'll be possible. You know, my wife Eileen Joe, who's from Conn River, grew up there, and she doesn't speak her language either. You know, but there are you know, there are attempts to, you know, they do teach the language in Conn River, and in other areas. The Flat Bay now, I believe, teaches it through the Halibu First Nation, and but I think that without, you know, immersion, it's probably not going to, you know, take root, solid root. You know, it'll be, you know, I'm happy to see that there's you know, that revitalization in trying to recapture the language, because, you know, as I said earlier, there's so much in the language, you know, that speaks to who we are as Indigenous people. Right?
So you've really embraced your Indigenous roots in your art. You attend the powwows and other events that are held, and you've made your own regalia, from moccasins to headdress.
Yeah.
Talk about that. How did you go about because these are, it seems to me, they're works of art in themselves. How did you learn how to do that and find out what it was you needed to make?
I think it all stems from that, you know, early want that you know, that you know, to find answers, you know, that being curious, and that curiosity brought me to, you know, not just this place where I'm living now in St. John's. I'll live here now for a little bit more, but you know, I ventured out. I you know, I went back home to Grand Falls, Windsor, you know, to talk to extended family there, to ask them questions, look at photographs, to hear their stories if they had any, But you know, I also ended up through my practice, you know, doing some work on the West Coast with Halibut First Nation or the Federation of Land Indians back in those days. You know, over 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and you know, I started going. I visited Conn River back in the day, and I guess Conn River became my go-to place. You know, I spent every chance that I could get. You know, I would if I knew I had a weekend or a week off, or you know, outside of my work at the time, I would pack up and I would head to Conn River, and I would stay with Mizel Joe at his house, and we would sit around with him and his brothers and other people from the community, and we'd be talking about language. I'd ask questions, they'd be asking questions too. You know, they'd be learning language, I'd be learning language, and it just became a regular thing for me. And I don't know, and you know, there was, God, this is like, well, we finally had our 25th Maui powwow this year in Conn River after COVID. But prior to that, I went with Mizel Joe, his wife, Khalida, and a few others to Eskasoni to attend my first powwow with them. And that was kind of, you know, a new thing and eye-opening and kind of gobsmacking at the same time, and just watching people dance, and then, you know, people who have the same ancestry as I did, and you know, just celebrating who they were as Indigenous people. And not long after, a year or two later, we started having our powwows here at our Maui Omis in Conn River, and I've only missed one. And but just, you know, just by attending there and talking to people from other parts of Mi'kmaq came to our powwows. People from here went to their powwows. There's a powwow circuit that happens practically all summer long in this part of Canada, but there's Maui Omis and powwows happen all over North America all year long, right? And that's what some people do. And you know, we have traditional powwows, there's competition powwows, but just by being there, you learn from people. You're talking, you know, again, asking questions. You're watching people move. You learn about the dances. You learn about the songs. How, you know, how the drum works, how the drummers drum, and how songs are constructed, and what types of songs are for women, for men, for this type of dance or that type of dance. And I mean, you can't help but get out there and, you know, strut your stuff and swing its way the Mi'kmaq way. And then I started to build my own regalia, and I mean, for me, I consider my regalia like a living thing. It's evolving, you know. It's something that's added to, or every time I you know, throughout the year, you know, I work on my regalia, or somebody gifts you something, or you gift something to somebody else, and you do a trade, you know, for certain regalia parts, or you learn something about a different part, you know, and you add to it, and so on.
You were born in Grand Falls, but you spent several of your growing up years in Mount Pearl, went to school in Mount Pearl. When did that art spark hit you? When did that interest develop in you?
My father got transferred because he worked with the provincial government when I was young, and he got transferred many times. And I think I figured out that we moved like 7 or 8 times before I reached high school, different areas of the province. And
wow.
Curling Corner Brook, back to Grand Falls, Windsor, St. John's, Mount Pearl, you know, and having, you know, switching schools all the time. My sister's a year younger than me. You know, we used to spend a lot of time together, but you know, you'd get to one place, you'd make friends, and you're uprooted, and you have to move somewhere else and try to make new friends. But in those little pockets of time, you know, I used to spend time, you know, with comics, like any kid, you know, and drawing, and you know, my dad drew a little bit. He was quite talented too. He there was every kind of instrument in our house, from, you know, harmonica to accordion, guitar, acoustic and electric, and keyboards, which I haven't got a clue how to play any of. But he also had drawing books and that, and you know, with calligraphy and so on. And I found myself, you know, thumbing through these types of books, and which there weren't many of, but you know, I just drew a lot when I was young, and it wasn't until I got to high school really where it kind of blossomed, I guess, under the tutelage of Robin Cook, who was my art teacher at Mount Pearl Central High in the late 70s. Yeah.
He was your high school art teacher.
Yep.
And became something of a mentor, I guess, for you.
Most definitely. I guess, you know, he recognized my abilities, I guess, but luckily for me, I mean, that school had, I think somebody told me that it was like a Dree school. I can't explain that. But they had, you know, there was a kiln there, they had soapstone, they had easels and paint, and there may have been a printing press.
Oh, very well equipped.
But, yeah, right. I mean, for a high school in the mid to late 70s, and lucky, you know, and you know, I spoke to him. He was, you know, wasn't just my teacher. I kind of got close. You know, I used to talk to him about stuff and everything, you know, and but it was he who, you know, kind of, I should mention probably like, by the time I got to high school, I was tired of doing all the moving around, and social life became very important to me, and I let my grades slip, you know, and I had some problems in high school, but Robin Cook was always there. He was a good shoulder to lean on, and I spoke to him in that, but make a long story short, probably 6 or 7 years later, after I graduated from there, I was back there substituting as a teacher. And there's still some of the teachers that taught me still there, which was kind of weird. It's like, what are you doing here?
That would have been kind of weird.
Yeah. But I left high school, and I did a year of commercial art at the College of Trades and Technology. And then I was still wanting more, and of course, I talked to Robin and Mr. Cook, and I ended up applying to go to NASCAD. Instead of, actually, I didn't even know about West Viking College on the West Coast at the time, but I went right to NASCAD. Yeah.
And NASCAD is
the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design.
Right.
Sorry,
yeah. I'm just wondering if I were to look at something you'd created, you know, when you were 20 or whatever, what would I see?
Well, you kind of asked me that question a little bit ago. My work, I guess, has always been about who I am and where I'm from. I mean, even the early work in, you know, before I went to NASCAD, or work while I was at NASCAD, was about who I was and where I was from. It was about being from Newfoundland. I painted fish, I drew fish. My dad was a diver. I did a little bit of diving, and you know, I did work about that. And it was around that time that we hooked up with my great uncle. And King's kind of, you know, after hearing the story and sitting with that, and it just kind of started, you know, just kind of opened up a gate, I guess, or door, and I started to explore that through my art practice as well, you know, doing research into Mi'kmaq culture, and you know, learning things about our basketry or our porcupine quill work, and applique, traditional clothing, the petroglyphs and Kijimakujik, and all of that material culture, all that cultural sacred markings, and so on, and you know, learning about language, and but you know, having tangible things as well, you know, and spending time in Conn River, finishing art school, and then I did an education degree at Memorial, where I did my electives in ethno-history and provincial history, you know, with the province and that, and learning about the Indigenous cultures here, taught by white men at the university, and kind of navigating around that, and questioning things, you know, and learning more from both sides, and questioning lots of things, and kind of exploring that through my art practice. Yeah. So it's always been about who I am and where I'm from, basically, in a nutshell.
Before we run out of time, I want you to tell one story which I thought was kind of nice. It's about Gerald Squires, and you're meeting Jerry, and then showing up at his lighthouse studio in Ferryland. Tell that story.
Well, I mean, after I graduated from NASCAD, I started spending lots of time at St. Michael's because I didn't have the wherewithal. I couldn't afford to rent a studio space. But luckily for me, St. Michael's was there that had a studio space and the facilities. And
St. Michael's Print Shop.
St. Michael's Print Shop, sorry. And by being there, I got to meet artists over the years. And but prior to that, even in high school, when I used to, I forget the name of the gallery on Duckworth Street, Ernie.
Moskov.
Yes, I used to visit there, and it was a small gallery down at the Murray premises there for a short period of time. And I was there one time for an opening. I was still in high school. And I met Jerry Squires, I introduced myself, right? Hi, I know who you are, and I like what you do. And he said, oh yeah, that's nice, and he was living at the Fairland Lighthouse with Gail and the kids at the time, and he said, you should come visit me, bring some of your artwork, basically. And I said, wow, that was incredible, and I was still in high school, and I took and I wanted to do that, right? And I wanted to get his opinion on my artwork, other than Robin Cook and so on. But I packed up I had a junker at the time. I was driving, and it was a miserable day. The day I decided to go to Fairland, I took time from school, put some of the work I had, drawings and that, and maybe a painting or two, put it in my car, and I drove to Fairland. And by the time I got down there, it was blowing a gale, not unlike the hurricane weather we've had just recently with Earl. And I get there, I'd never been down there before, but you see where the lighthouse is, despite the weather. And I headed that way, and you get out there, there's this little isthmus towards where the peninsula is, where the lighthouse is. And it was raining like this, and the wind was blowing, and I get to the other side, and I get stuck in the mud. And I don't know how I'm going to get back. I managed to turn around afterwards, but I parked. It was pouring rain, and I walked into the lighthouse. It was a good walk. And I get in there, and the wind and the rain, and I'm soaking wet, and I knock on the door. No answer. Oh no, I'm all this way. It probably took me an hour to drive there, probably another hour to get in there, and there's nobody there. And so I knocked harder, and still no answer. And I walked around the lighthouse, and there was a window, and I stopped, and I looked in the window. And I peered in the window. I must have stayed there until, I don't know, time seemed like it stood still, but I stood there, and I peered in through the window, and I saw for the first time an artist studio. The easel, the canvases, paintings finished, paintings unfinished, work in progress, brushes, paints everywhere, the palette, and just, I was gobsmacked. I just stood there, probably my jaw might have been hanging open, and I kind of, in retrospect, not long after, I got exactly what I wanted to get by going there, but he wasn't even there. But it was actually several years later when I told him that story, right? He and Gail, and that was quite the day. I mean, I still picture it clearly in my mind right now.
St. Michael's Print Shop has been very important in your life.
Most definitely.
Just talk about that relationship.
Well, I mean, it was there.
You and St. Michael's.
Yeah, well, Bill Ritchie was there and Peter Walker was there when I started poking around. I think they had just moved from the community of St. Michael's to St. John's, luckily for me, because I didn't have a car at that time. And but I managed to get there to work as a community artist, because it's a not-for-profit, and they have the facilities there. You pay a nominal shop rental to use their equipment and so on. And as I did, and it became my studio, and I worked there whenever I could. I still had to get a job and pay for my student loans and so on. And but I've spent many years there over the years. St. Michael's is still in the same place. Most of the same equipment is still there, and I've watched stones get broken and disappeared. The stones I worked on in stone lithography mostly, and but I worked there in many capacities. I was first and foremost, I worked there as an artist, as a visual artist, to to do my own practice, lithography, etching, and so on. And but then over the years, managed to. I worked there for a time as a technician, took care of the shop, the chemistries and everything, topped everything up, helped other young artists in their practice, and I did some teaching, and we already had a visiting artist program. You learn something from visitors, you learn from them, and because it's a co-op, and but having worked there with other artists for many years, it was like people like it was Anne Meredith Barry mostly, but Otis Thomasowskis from Queen's University, and Don Holman used to come from Ontario annually, and they recognized my abilities as a printmaker, and they suggested that I design my own chop.
What does that mean?
A chop is it's a stamp and embossing, which kind of in the custom print world. As a producer of art or prints, it's kind of a production process where I would prepare a matrix, a stone, or a plate with another artist. They would hire me basically to help them create their work. So I would prepare their matrix. They would make their marks. I would work with them to show them how to make marks, even, or then we would mix colors to proof the image so that they can get what they want in the end. And when they see what they want or are happy with what they have, I would run the edition for them. And so, but at the end they would number their prints, they would sign it their name, they would title it. St. Michael's has its chop, which is a puffin head, that's their logo. So that would be embossed in the print. But if I printed it, I would put my embossing there, so I would get recognition for the work that I put into producing this image for this artist. So it was another way for me to get to supplement my income. Working with other artists and working for the shop. I brought money to the shop as well. As a custom printer. So people came, not just community artists, worked with me, and I worked with just about every artist here at the time, with Jerry Squires and Barry quite a bit. I've made books with Ann Barry and everything, and Scott Gowdy. Alan Parsons Shepherd, and there was artists who came from other parts of Canada to work with me, and a couple of international artists who came to work with me at St. Michael's.
Jerry, it's been great having this chat with you. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but thank you for being here.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Jerry Evans, master printmaker. And that's it for this edition of Karl Wells' Point to Point. We'll see you again next time.
If you want convenience, Marie's Mini Mart is here for you. A one-stop shop for a variety of products, home-style breads, sandwiches, plus check out our freshly baked artisan bread